Every family has its secrets. Does Casey Anthony's family have more than its share? More than a decade after she was acquitted for the murder of her daughter Caylee, she's breaking her silence about what went on behind closed doors in a 3-part Peacock docuseries called Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. But the title really should include a question mark. It's always been next to impossible to tell where the truth starts and the lies stop. Now, all these years later, Casey claims it was her father, George Anthony, who killed little Caylee. So what exactly is the truth as she sees it? Let's get into it. I'm Chris, and this is True Crime Recaps, the only channel bringing you all the crime in half the time. If you want all the facts with none of the fluff, please tap that like button and remember to subscribe so you never miss a recap. Now, let's dive into Casey Anthony's latest version of events. They say there's always two sides to every story, but when it comes to murder, there's really only one. Who did it? In 2011, a Florida jury decided that Casey Anthony didn't do it, and she was only found guilty for lying to the police. And since she'd already been in prison since 2008, she only had to serve 10 more days behind bars to finish out her sentence. After her release, she moved in with Patrick McKenna, the lead investigator from her defense team. And since then, she's stayed quiet on the subject and kept a low profile in South Florida. Over the years, she's made a living doing a variety of odd jobs. Most recently, she opened up a detective agency with Pat called Case Research and Consulting Services. So, was she trying to find her daughter's real killer? No, because apparently she'd known all along who the culprit was. Her own father, George. But before we get into all that, how about a quick refresher on the case? On July 15th, 2008, Casey's mother, Cindy, called 911. Casey and Caylee lived at home with her and George, but she told the 911 operator she hadn't seen her granddaughter since June 15th, 2008. That was Father's Day. On June 16th, Cindy left for work early, around 7 a.m. That night, she got a text from Casey saying she was working late and Caylee was with a babysitter. After that, she didn't see Casey again for the next month. When she finally tracked her down at a friend's house, Casey told her the babysitter stole Caylee. When she demanded to know what she'd been doing about it for the last 31 days, Casey told her she'd been looking for her and going through other resources to find her. On July 16th, she was arrested for child neglect. The charges were upgraded to murder in October 2008. 2 months later, on December 11th, 2008, a meter reader stumbled across Caylee's body in an overgrown lot a half-mile from Casey's parents' house. The little girl was wrapped in a Winnie the Pooh blanket in a laundry bag, and the little bundle had been stuffed in plastic bags. 3 pieces of duct tape were found on her jawbone. Casey's murder trial started in Clearwater, Florida on May 24, 2011. The jury deliberated for almost 11 hours before returning a shocking not guilty verdict on July 5, 2011. How did they find their way to an acquittal? They blamed her father, George. Juror number 3 told ABC that she thought he was dishonest, saying, "I don't know if he had anything to do with it, but I think he was there. He and Casey have something." This is what Casey has to say about her bizarre family dynamics. In court in 2011, she claimed her father and brother had been sexually abusing her since she was little. You should know that George and Casey's brother Lee both deny her claims. But prison psychologists who treated her at the time were featured on the documentary, saying her behavior did fit the pattern of a victim of abuse. In her first on-camera interview since her trial, she claimed lying came second nature to her because as a victim of abuse, she was taught to hide her family's 6 secrets. And Caylee's birth and death would become 2 of its most shocking secrets. At 18, she says she was drugged and violated at a party. 9 months later, Caylee was born. But even that was shrouded in lies and mystery. At first, she didn't tell anyone. Then she told her boyfriend it was his. It wasn't. She claimed she told her mother what actually happened, only to be blamed for the attack. Then she started to tell people her baby's father was an old flame who later died. For the next few years, she and her baby lived with Cindy and George. On June 16, 2008, she now claims she woke up to her father asking where Caylee was. According to Casey, the little girl usually slept in her room because she was afraid of what her father might do to her if Caylee was alone at night. When Casey went outside to look for her, she says George had the toddler's body in his arms. He handed her over, telling Casey it was her fault, that she caused it. Now, what exactly it was, she didn't elaborate, and claims she didn't really grasp the fact that her daughter was dead. In fact, she says she didn't call 911 or tell anyone about it because her father told her Caylee was going to be okay. All she remembered was that Caylee was wet and not moving. Then he took her body back and disappeared with her. For the next 31 days, she claimed her father kept reassuring her Caylee was fine, and if she just acted normal, she would get her back. So, that's what she did. From that day to the day Cindy called 911, Casey claimed she was working as a club promoter, although to the rest of the world, it looked like she was just partying hard. Based on the pictures, she was out and about with friends, competing in hot body contests, getting a tattoo of the words good life in Italian. The tattoo artist testified that she didn't seem upset about anything. She seemed pretty happy. But Casey now says the tattoo was some kind of FU to her family. And then on July 15th, 2008, the party stopped. That's the day her parents went to an impound lot to pick up her car. George and the tow truck driver testified that it stank of decomposition when he picked it up from the impound lot. The car had been left in a parking lot for 3 days. Inside the trunk was a bag of garbage with maggots crawling in it. Caylee's car seat and her favorite doll were still in the car. Now, she says, after years of therapy, she thinks she knows what might have happened. She believes George accidentally killed Caylee by smothering her with a pillow while abusing her. That's something she claims he did to her as a kid. But back then, Casey blamed someone else first. She claimed a woman named Zenaida Gonzalez took Caylee. And she actually took police to the woman's apartment. But the truth was, no one had lived there for 5 months. And Casey now says she chose it because a good friend of hers used to live in the same apartment complex. She let the police and others search for the babysitter for months before they finally realized she didn't even exist. Here's a fun fact you might not know. There is a woman with the name Zenaida Gonzalez, and she lived in Orlando, but she never met Casey or Caylee, and she wasn't even a nanny. She tried to sue Casey for defamation, but the case was dropped. So, where did Casey even come up with that name? Marcus Parks from the last podcast on the left had a theory on that. In a 2018 interview for A&E's Real Crime, he said he came across a blog that shared the names of the 2 people that were living on either side of the lot where Caylee's body was found. On one side was a woman named Zenaida. On the other side was a man with the last name Gonzalez. If it's true, that's an amazing coincidence. But the biggest takeaway here is that Casey has a history of doubling down when it comes to her lies. When the police asked if she told anyone Caylee was missing, she said she told her coworkers at Universal Studios. So they all went to Universal Studios to confirm her story. As soon as they got there, the front desk person told them she didn't work there. But instead of backing down and telling the truth like any sane person would do, she insisted she did work there, even going so far as to walk into the building with the police and wave to people. Finally, she was forced to give it up and come clean. The officers on her case think she's still lying today. But the 2022 Peacock docuseries isn't the first time she blamed her daughter's murder on George. In a jailhouse interview, she told 2 psychiatrists she thought her father might have taken Caylee out of her room to molest her and then drowned her to cover up the abuse. And her brother told police that George would bury the family's pets in the same way that Caylee was found. No matter who you believe, it's very clear that someone in the Anthony house covered up the child's death. She was wrapped in a blanket from her bed, and the duct tape on her mouth was the same kind kept in the family garage. Unfortunately, the child's body was too far gone for a cause of death to be determined. As far as the duct tape found on her face, Casey's defense team does not think she was smothered with it. They believe the garbage bags were duct taped shut, and over time, it made its way onto her face. But what was someone trying to hide? Murder or a tragic accident. Her lawyers tried to split the difference. They claimed Caylee accidentally drowned in the family's above-ground pool. Then George covered it up and told Casey to keep quiet and act like everything was normal. But Casey says not even she believes that's what happened. She doesn't think Caylee would have tried to go swimming alone, and she insists the ladder to the pool wasn't there, so the child wouldn't have been able to get into the pool. But she also said Caylee's body was wet before George took her away. It's all very confusing, and even Casey claims she doesn't know how her child really died. Here's what we do know. On the afternoon she disappeared, someone in the Anthony house searched the term foolproof suffocation. Then the search history was deleted on July 16th, the day Casey was arrested. But no one knew about this until after she was acquitted. How did the prosecution's investigators miss it? Because they only checked Internet Explorer, not Firefox, which is what Casey used to get online. In his book, Presumed Guilty, Casey Anthony, The Inside Story, one of her attorneys, Jose Baez, implied that George was searching that term since it happened an hour after he said Casey left the house with Caylee early on the afternoon of June 16, 2008. But Casey's phone was still pinging at the house until late that afternoon. However, in his book, Jose says Casey was on the phone with a friend at the time someone was searching that term. The only other people living in the house were Cindy and George, and both of them deny searching for that term. George tried to commit suicide in January 2009. He left a 5-page note, but it didn't contain any confessions from him. It implied that Casey's friends might be responsible for Caylee's death. But even today, the friends interviewed by the documentary team insist Casey was a good mother, and the idea that she would kill her baby just so she could go out and party seemed insane to them and the jury. The question of motive was another reason they found her not guilty. When it comes to motive, Casey insists it comes down to her father's alleged abuse. And to back up her claims, she points out some of the things he said about Caylee after her death. Things like how he missed the sweet smell of her sweat. She and her defense team, who she now considers family, pointed out that George, too, could be accused of telling some real whoppers. For example, a woman he was allegedly having an affair with testified at Casey's trial. She claimed George told her it was an accident that snowballed out of control, and she didn't ask him for details. But he denied all of it, the affair and the statement. The prosecution built a lot of their case around the theory that Casey chloroformed Caylee, then duct taped her nose and mouth until she suffocated to death. They based that on two things: an internet search for chloroform in March 2008 and the duct tape found on Caylee's face. But if you remember, Casey used Firefox and her parents allegedly used Explorer. When it came to the chloroform search, Cindy said it was her, except she wasn't looking for chloroform tips. She was looking up chlorophyll to find out if her dog would be okay after eating bamboo. The term autofilled chloroform, and she looked at the first link out of curiosity. It was about how chloroform was used in the 19th century. But the prosecution also pointed to forensic evidence found in the trunk of the car Casey drove. They said the carpet tested positive for chloroform and human decomposition, and they claimed a cadaver dog signaled on the trunk. But in the docuseries, Casey's defense team pointed out that plenty of other dogs did not signal on the trunk. Lab reports found that a strand of Caylee's hair found in the trunk showed characteristics of apparent decomposition. They even conducted air sample tests that found chemical compounds consistent with a decomposing body. Tests her defense team claim are nothing but junk science. But then again, there was that strong stink several people noticed coming from the car. The thing is, some household cleaning products also leave traces of chloroform behind. So if, for example, Caylee's body had been in the trunk and someone tried to clean out the smell, that might have accounted for the chloroform. It might also explain why she put a bag of garbage in her trunk, then abandoned the car completely, although she claims she just forgot the garbage was in there. The duct tape found with the body was a crucial piece of evidence for the prosecution. They believed the jury would see that and come to the same conclusion most of us have. The duct tape covering Caylee's mouth and nose was basically the murder weapon, but there were no fingerprints or DNA linking Casey to the tape. And to be fair, there was nothing linking anyone to the tape. Thanks to Florida's heat and humidity, any evidence that might have been there was gone. But George wasn't the only person the defense blamed. The utility worker who discovered Caylee's body was also a prime target. This is a very strange story. According to ABC, he was a former bail bondsman. He called police twice in August 2008 to tell them to search the area where Caylee was ultimately found. Apparently, he was on his way home from work one day when he passed the lot and thought it seemed like a logical place to hide a body. The police came out but didn't really search the area thoroughly since it was under marshy water at the time. Now, by December, the water had receded and the bag with her remains was visible. He told ABC that any suggestion that he had anything to do with her death was ridiculous, but her legal team threw it out there anyway. That man also tried suing Casey for defamation. If you're keeping track, that was the second defamation lawsuit against her. But in January 2020, it was dismissed for lack of evidence. And in the end, most of the jury really didn't like what they were hearing about and from her family. Although now, it seems like her new docuseries may have helped convince some of the former jurors that she was actually guilty. Once a liar, always a liar. If I heard her talk during court, I would have convicted her, is what one former juror told People. In 2018, her parents sat down with A&E for an episode called Casey Anthony's Parents Speak. By this time, George was openly blaming Casey. He jumped on the infamous Zanny the Nanny theory, a play on Xanax and the name Casey made up for the babysitter. He speculated that Casey gave Caylee a sedative and she didn't wake up. In his words, Caylee was always a very healthy child, a very healthy girl, but there were times that she would sleep for 10, 12, 13 hours at a time. Makes no sense to me. When I would see her from one day to the next, it was totally different. I could see a difference with blackness underneath the eyes and stuff like that. A 2.5, almost 3-year-old child would not have that unless something was going on. His theory was that Casey tried to cover it up. She put the child's body in the trunk of her car and left her there for a couple of days. Their neighbor testified that Casey borrowed a shovel for an hour on June 18th. The fact is, Casey herself admits she was a good and frequent liar back then. She claims she's devoted to truth-telling nowadays, but with no proof to say exactly who's responsible for Caylee's death, it's all subjective. And as far as she's concerned, she doesn't care if you believe her. According to what one close friend told People.com, she is pleased with the show and she feels like she said exactly what she needed to say. If people don't believe her or still hate her, she doesn't give a shh. So what do you think? Is there any truth to her latest version of events? Let's talk about it in the comments. And that's your recap.
Thanks for hanging out with us today.
If you like getting all the crime in half the time, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story.
We're here Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but don't go away. Catch up on more recaps right here, right now.
Until next time, take care.